Most great leaders were promoted for doing great work, not for knowing how to lead. Then suddenly they're in charge of a team. And there's no manual, no guidance, just a new title and, well, a whole lot of guessing. My guest today is Kevin Frank, former creative leader at LinkedIn and Apple. And Kevin recently published a book, Raising Creative Teams. In that book, we get to see through the eyes of someone's experience and earned wisdom what creative leadership really takes. And in this conversation, we unpack a lot. The moment Kevin realized his job wasn't to make the work better, it was to make a great environment where great work can happen. And that changed everything for Kevin and how he leads. We talk about the shift from creative to creative leader, from doer to system designer, and the difference between feedback that helps and the feedback that hurts. We also got into hiring, trust building, gratitude, and what it really means to articulate vision as a creative act. So, if you lead creative people or you're a creative ops leader who supports those that do, well, you're going to want to hear this. So, let's get into it. Kevin Frank, welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast. It's so great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation. You're well known in the creative world. You used to be the executive creative director at, most recently at LinkedIn, and then previously you've been at places like Apple, both very well known names, in senior creative leadership roles. And you recently published a book called Raising Creative Teams, which was sort of the spark for our conversation that we had a couple of months ago, and then that has led us to the conversation we're going to be having today. Because I think creative leadership is something that I really want to, dock into more on this podcast, just in general. But it also feels like we're sort of at this inflection point and we should be asking ourselves, what is creative leadership in this time? Especially as creative leaders are like grappling with, how do I like balance human creativity with what AI is now enabling, what the machines are enabling and things like that. But before we get to any of that, let's learn a little bit about you and your background. So, and what sort of motivated you to write this book called Raising Creative Teams, which really came out of your experience of you're a very very impactful creative person within these organizations, and then you got put into this role of creative leadership, and what you discovered over time is doing the creative work and leading the creative team are very different. So tell us a bit about your background, and then bring us to what led to you writing this book. What was your motivation?
Sure. And that's thank you for that question. That's great. My background is in advertising as a copywriter. And so what that means is, I started off agency side writing television commercials and billboards and radio commercials and print ads and all of those things that one would expect a creative writer to create. Um, and from there, I'd say my career path was pretty linear. I mean, there were ups and downs, like with every career path, but I went from writer to senior writer to associate creative director to creative director to ECD. That's sort of the trajectory. But when I first was promoted to CD, I realized very quickly that leading a creative team and being a creative person it's just a totally different skill set. It's almost as if somebody had said, okay, you were a copywriter at an agency and now you're going to be a dentist. It's that different of a skill set from night and day. And so, I had to relearn all of that stuff from scratch. So the first thing I had to figure out was like, do I like this? Do I like this other thing, which is not creating the work myself? It's creating an environment where other people can be successful and other people can do the kind of creative work that we aspire to. And then once I figured that out to say like, yeah, actually, this is a thing that I enjoy and I get a lot of satisfaction from, the next question is like, how the heck do I do that? And so to take it back to your original question, that's sort of how I got there. Reflecting on my own experience as a creative leader and leading creative teams, I just wish somebody had told me all that stuff before they dropped me into it. I wish somebody had said to me, "Hey, your job is not to do the work anymore. It is to create an environment where your team can be successful and help them to do that." And so, why did I write this book? Because I wish somebody had written it when I was first leading my first creative team.
So that's something I want to dig into a little bit because you talked about like your career trajectory of going through those various creative roles and then somebody coming along and going, well, Kevin, the next natural step is for you to step into the creative director role. And I think
Yeah,
everyone experiences that in whatever career path they're on is there's almost like this built-in assumption that you have to keep going to the next rung, right? It's sort of like that sense of hierarchy that is built into our biological operating system in a way. Oh, I have to keep going. I can't stay here. For somebody listening today who's like that great copywriter, that great creative, and they're really enjoying it, what are the questions they should be asking themselves? You know, if somebody knocks on their door and says this creative director opportunity is available, or nobody's knocking on the door, but they're wondering themselves, should I go and start to like open those doors and kick those doors down? And should I go to that next rung? What questions do you wish you'd asked yourself with the benefit of hindsight?
yeah. Again, I wish that I had. I guess I wish I had known what the job was. So I would have asked myself, "Hey, go do a little bit more research as to what a creative director actually does, as opposed to what my experience of creative direction was, which in a lot of cases was make it bluer, make it funnier, make it greener, make it smaller. Very sort of the functional aspects of creative direction. But there's this whole other piece of creative direction and creative leadership, which is again, setting people up for success and creating that space for the team. So the first thing I would have done is to say, like, do you actually know what a creative director is? I think that's a question I would have asked myself. Um, and knowing what I know now, the answer is no. I don't. I didn't actually know that. I would have asked myself, is if assuming that I knew the job of a creative director was not just giving direction, assuming that I knew that it was creating these environments and setting other people up to succeed, I would have asked myself, hey, is this something you enjoy? Are you ready to give up doing the work yourself? And we all get into this business as creative folks because we really, really like doing the work ourselves, right? It's incredibly satisfying to look at a blank piece of paper and make something appear on it. And so, you know, asking myself, am I ready to give that up so that somebody else can have that experience?
You talked about like creating the environment, which in
Yeah,
of itself is sort of like a creative expression as well. Like, so
absolutely.
looking back on when you moved into that role, like, what were the things that you were surprised by? It sounds like, I'm no longer the person working on the blank canvas, so to speak, or it's a different blank canvas. I'm creating the environment. Like, what were sort of the mental shifts you had to make to really embrace that role of creative director, no longer being, the person painting on the canvas?
Yeah, I mean, I had to shift away from this idea that my job is to make the creative, and shift to the idea that my job is now to make the environment. My job is, and the other big mental shift that I had to make was, so my whole career it had always been about, like, how can I make the great creative work, and shifting away from this idea of it's all about the work to it's all about the environment and the relationships that you have to build to learn how to make that work, to sell that work. That was a big mental shift for me. The other thing is a big mental shift for me was scheduling my time to not just have creativity look at that blank canvas time, but to schedule one-to-ones with everybody on my team really reliably. So investing in those relationships in a predictable, regular way was a very different shift. It was like it was almost like the shift from like I'm a creative to I'm a manager now. And for me, management had been like a dirty word for a long time. It's like, oh, managers are like the people who tell you what to do. Um, so accepting the fact that, okay, actually I'm gonna be a manager now. I'm gonna be one of those people that I always, sort of demonized and villainized, and learning what that meant, and embracing that role so that other people could create that work was a big shift for me.
So, talk to me a little bit more about like, and as much as you can reference specific examples from,
Yeah.
let's say LinkedIn, like how did you go about designing that environment? Like, what were you trying to achieve when you think about designing an environment for the creative team? What were you looking to achieve? Were there like, and did you like try and measure it in a quantitative way? Was it more like qualitative, like feeling based? And like any stories or examples of how you went about creating the right environment? Because what it sounds like you're looking to do is how do I help this creative team be successful in whatever way success is defined?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I created that environment at LinkedIn, I did it from the very beginning with everybody who I hired. And one of the ways that I created that team at LinkedIn was I wanted to bring in a lot of agency people, because that sort of unbridled creativity of an agency brought into a more sort of corporate environment like LinkedIn, I thought was going to create really good work. But before I brought anybody in, I had to have a conversation with them about what it looked like to work in house versus what it looked like to work at an agency. And honestly, the first question that a lot of folks um, would ask me when I was trying to hire them, they would say like, "Is working in house, is this going to kill my career?" Right? I'm working at this well-known agency. I want to keep working on my book. I want to keep winning awards. Is moving in house going to kill my career? And so the answer to that, and this goes back to your question too about like how do you build that environment, is I would say to them, I'd say, look, the reason to come work at LinkedIn, and the same story at Apple, was the reason to come work here is because you believe in what the company is doing. And at Apple, that meant making incredible technology, and at LinkedIn, that meant creating opportunities for all of the members of LinkedIn to get jobs or learn new skills or connect with new people professionally. So I would say to them, that's your number one priority, is helping people in their professional careers if you're going to come work at LinkedIn. Now, I want you, the interviewee, to believe that like I want to do great work, and I hope that we are going to do the kind of work that wins awards and that you can put in your book. But that's not the big goal anymore. The goal is believing in the company mission. And so the way that I started to create that environment for success was to be really, really honest about what the goal was. Um, and to say that, yeah, like I'm still here to help you create that great work, but the more important thing is the culture and the goal that you are creating the work. It's not just to win awards anymore. It is to to create a place where LinkedIn members can thrive and succeed.
So that also then makes me think like the environment just isn't about like creating the environment for the creatives on the team to allow them to succeed and thrive. As you
Yeah,
said, you're very transparent about like this is about the business ultimately is what it is about. And that contrasts pretty dramatically with external agencies. I was just on a webinar this morning. Today's June 2nd when we're recording this. And we're talking about how a lot of in-house teams have just taken the external agency model and tried to Frankenstein it into an internal environment. And maybe in-house agency isn't even the right term to use. Maybe it should just be creative engine.
yeah,
And sort of keying off of that, like when you think about the environment and your role as a creative leader, you're getting your team to think about and care about, most importantly, the business. It is a business that we serve in driving that forward. And sure, there might be awards and things like that, but it's the business. How do you get the business to think about the creative team in the right way? Because that's part of designing the environment as well. It's just
Yeah.
not like the creative team, it's the business as a whole. And how do they perceive and interact with and leverage the creative team, not just simply as, oh, those guys over there with Photoshop and Final Cut Pro
Yeah.
just throw stuff over the wall, but really more like as a strategic capability and asset.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with building those partnerships, right? It's not, I think the classic agency client model is the client says, "Hey, we need this thing," and the agency goes away and thinks about it and comes back with the beautiful deck and a dog and pony show and says, like, "Here's how we solved your problem." I really believe in one of the things that I learned at Apple and I learned at LinkedIn is that the way to prove your value is not to go away and do that work in isolation. And one of the great advantages of working in house is that you have access to those clients. You are the client all the time. And so building those relationships with your clients, having one on ones with them on a regular basis, understanding what their business challenges are, and treating the presentation as another check in, if you will. It's not, the big presentation. It's like, here's the thing we talked about last time, and the thing we talked about the time before that, and the thing we talked about the time before that. Here's how we've evolved this work together over time so that we are solving your business problem together. That's the value that an in-house creative team is going to bring that an external agency can't always bring.
So it's really bringing that creative mindset and thinking. So it's not even starting with necessarily like, do you need a landing page? Do you need some great copy or anything like that? Those are downstream of what are you actually trying to achieve? And let us bring our brilliant creative minds to the table to like sort of
Yeah.
go, what are you trying to do and how do we do it?
Yeah, well, even to put a finer point on that, it's not even what are you trying to achieve, it's what are we trying to achieve. We all work for LinkedIn, we all work for Apple, we all work for this company. You have KPIs and ROIs and business goals that you need to hit specifically. I have a team that is motivated by doing great creative work. Let's But we have this common goal of realizing the company's mission. Let's talk about ways that we can do that together.
I love that because sort of embedded in that is like a we mindset versus a me mindset, right? And it seems
Absolutely.
like in today's world, so much of what we do is like we don't even realize the gravitational pull of like our me culture versus a we culture.
Yeah. And that's a thing that I had to really learn. It's a thing that I had to practice, and it's a thing that I tried to uh, include in my team culture to say, hey, we are going to talk about our team as a we, and we're going to talk about our clients as a we. It's not us and them. One of the things that I liked to do, again, going back to award shows and that not being the primary motivator, but I think there's value in wanting to do award winning work. But one of the things I did was whenever we entered stuff in award shows, I would put everybody who worked on the campaign on the credits, even if their work was one of the campaigns that died. Because my opinion is, like, for that one campaign to live, a lot of other stuff had to die, and who's to say that that one thing didn't live because the client needed to see all that other work along the way to get to that one thing, or the idea that lived, might have seen one of the other pieces of work on the wall in the room and said, like, oh yeah, that would be a good thing to incorporate into our work. Like, one of the things that I try to do in my creative direction style and my leadership style is talk about the things that are working in all of the work that we're looking at, and the things that aren't working, that aren't working. And so whatever that final product is, even if one team officially came up with the idea, the final product is has a bit of everybody in it. And so bringing that we mindset into everything that we would do at a team, I think was a really powerful tool.
I love that. You have given me like that's actually very beautiful to think about it. Like the manifestation of the we mindset and the way you
Yeah.
would have. give credit to people whose campaigns didn't ship, or like where there was things that didn't work, sometimes called failures. The recognition of that as it's part of learning and experimenting, and it's through that we're eventually able to create success. Like the idea of like success right out of the gate or lightning in a bottle. It's called lightning in a bottle because it's rare. It doesn't really
Yeah,
happen all that often. You need sacrifices. And that's the word. It's sacrifice that is part of that we mindset. It's
yeah,
not present in the me mindset. In the me mindset, it's hoarding. It's like I love that. That's a really beautiful way to
yeah.
think about creating
Well,
that we mindset.
thanks. Yeah, and I like what you were saying about failure as well. I mean, I think the creative process, like you can't have creativity without failure. Like by definition, like creativity is like it's just trying stuff until you have something beautiful or meaningful or emotional or powerful or whatever. But it's not, it just doesn't appear out of thin air. You fail. It's trying all these other things that don't give you the emotional reaction that the final product does. One of the other things too, and I really actually like talking about failure, is we the thread of this whole conversation is like how do you create those environments where creativity can thrive, and I think being really concrete about the role of failure and normalizing failure and celebrating failure gives creatives room to say like, okay, cool, I'm not going to get fired if I come up with the wrong idea. Like that's how you create the industry term right now is the psychologically safe spaces, but the reason that you have psychological safety is like it's okay to mess up, and if you do that not just in the work but in all of the actions that you create in a team, that is going to be a culture that really supports creativity.
Yeah, and it's like creativity, as you were saying, by its very nature, is like it's about iteration, and it's never
Yeah,
done. There is never a finish line. You might ship a campaign or ship a refresh of the brand, but it's never done. It's like everything else in life, really. It's a constant work in progress.
yeah.
But we seem to live in a culture of I need to show up with or as perfect, and that really holds us back from our creative selves and our creative expression coming forward. So that environment that you talk about building, and you talk a lot about like rituals. I think it's in chapters 4 and 5 in your book. I might be getting the chapter numbers wrong, but it's in there. You talk a
I'm
lot
just
about
glad you read it, by the way. It's a,
oh,
you can get the
you
chapter numbers wrong as long as you read it. That's great.
You talk a lot about the hey, I do my research. You talk a lot about the rituals, right? So tell me about some of those rituals. Like, how do you celebrate? How do you create that trust, that safety? How do you encourage failure as a means to iterate and get closer to like true realization of an individual creator's potential or the team's potential?
I think the word ritual is a really revealing one. One of the other words I like to use that's very related to that is practice, the practice of doing something. By its very nature, like a ritual or a practice means you have to do it a lot, and you're not very good at it at first. You need to get better at it. And to your point before, you're never actually finished with it, right? You don't ever achieve perfection. And so part of the way that I imbue that is just to do it every day, to show up in a way that sets the example for my team that like I'm walking that talk, I'm actually doing the thing. Part of the way that I normalize failure is number one, I try to celebrate it and not punish it. And number two, like I think again as a leader, it's people will follow my example. People follow leaders' examples. And so when I mess up, which is a lot, um, saying like, "Hey, that was my fault. I messed up." I'm sorry, how can I do better at that next time? So, I'm not even penalizing myself like, oh, I'm so dumb. I can't believe I did that. It's just, modeling the behavior to say like, okay, it's okay to mess up. Here's how I would handle my own mistakes. And I would like to encourage you to handle yours the same way so that we create this culture, so that we create this ritual, so that we practice messing up and practice being okay with that is an approach that I found helpful.
Yeah, one thing I've always been a fan of, and I think very often maybe it's even the language we use, like, we could call it failures, or we could call it like learning, or we could call it just, one step closer to getting to the right answer or the right outcome or something like that. And
Yeah,
even tracking that, we're so obsessed in our current corporate environments with measuring output. And that's important. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. But I think we need to also start to introduce like measuring like learning, because I think if we measure, are we actually learning? Are we actually failing? And what are we learning through that? Like I think learning velocity or failure velocity might be something valuable to track, like creative
yeah.
teams and just more broadly in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think whenever we would do a big project, I mean, I know the official business term is post-mortem, so we would try to do those on the projects that we did, and we said like, okay, what went well about this project? What didn't go so well? And what can we do next time? And I wouldn't just talk about that with the team that worked on the project. So I would, one of the ways that I create transparency and openness with my teams is I make sure that I have a, a team meeting every week, and part of that team meeting is to share the work that's going on across the team. And so we would have kind of like public postmortems. We would say, here's the project that we did, here's the work that we wound up doing, here's the work we didn't wind up doing. So, showing both the success and the failure to the entire team, not just the team that worked on the project, and then talking about the things that worked and didn't work, because those things are valuable for the entire team to hear and learn from, so that it sets us up to be more successful the next go around.
So can you think back, like whether it was LinkedIn or Apple or anywhere else that you've been, where you introduced a ritual and sort of like the before and after sort of change you saw in like whether it was behavior or safety, trust, whatever it was?
Yeah, I think I mean, my the ritual that I most adhere to, and I talk about this in the book as well, is just the one to one. And I know that that's a really basic building block, but I didn't even know that that existed before I started at Apple. And so that's a ritual that I started, not just when people came to work for me, but I really tried to set that precedent during the interview. So somebody would come in an interview and I would say, hey, there's this thing called the one to one, and we're going to meet every single week, and we are going to set goals for you. We're going to talk about what would make you successful, and we are going to work together to achieve those goals. So, you're on an interview now. You don't even work for me yet. But if you were to come work for me, what are the things that you would want to get out of this job? What do you see as starting to be your metrics of success? And so setting up the expectation that this weekly ritual of one-to-ones, of checking in on goals and continuing to move forward towards them, setting that precedent before somebody works for me, and then immediately making good on that promise, immediately following up on it, and putting one regular one-to-one time on their calendars that we adhere to religiously, I think is the ritual that I found the most powerful, and one that I instituted immediately at LinkedIn.
So how did you structure your one-to-ones? Because I mean, I'm sure you've noticed in your LinkedIn feeds are filled just like mine with people saying one-to-ones are antiquated, they're
Yeah,
inefficient, they're not useful. If Mr. Elon Musk were to join us on this call as a third panelist, he'd
yeah,
be rolling his eyes pretty hard at the
yeah,
time wasted, as he would say, on one-to-one. So
yeah.
how did you structure them so it was valuable for you as a leader and then it was valuable for everybody on your team?
Yeah, so my basic structure, and again, like you have to start somewhere. So like one to one, number one is me explaining, again, I've done this in the interview, but like when they finally, came in their first week of work, I'd say, okay, here's what a one to one, here's how it's going to work. We're going to get together every week. We're going to talk about your business goals, your personal goals, whatever you view as helping you reach success. And that's where we're going to spend our time. We're going to try really, really hard not to talk about projects that you're working on unless a challenge comes up in them that is related to those business goals. This is about time to help you make you more successful. One of the things that I would also do is, because the people who worked for me were either had creative in their title or worked on a creative team, I would try to draw an analogy to the creative process for them. So I would say, so if you were working on a creative project, you'd get a brief and you'd have deliverables and you'd know what the goals are, and you'd have an insight, you'd have all that stuff. So now imagine our common project, our common brief is your success. So how are we going to creatively solve the challenge of helping you be more successful? So again, to draw out that analogy, I would say, okay, if you were working on a creative brief, you need to make a television spot for a car. Let's brainstorm some stuff. If we are working on the brief of you, if we're working on you in a one-to-one, we know that one of the goals that you've set, for example, is you want to be a better presenter. Um, so let's pretend that's a creative project. What are some things that we could do to help you be a better presenter? We've got this big long list of stuff, right? We're creating hot in a hot state, and then we'll edit it down in a cold state, and then let's pick those two or three that seem the most fruitful and pursue them. So that's really how I approached one-to-ones, was to say, like, here's what a one-to-one is. Let's identify the goals. Let's problem solve for them together as if they are a creative problem. And then let's execute on those solutions that we found to continue moving us closer and closer to that goal of your success.
You're making me go back to earlier in the conversation where you're like moving into that creative leadership role is realizing that your job is now your creative work is the environment,
Yeah.
and you're no longer the person doing the design, the copy, so on and so forth. But in these one-on-ones, like designing that environment, you're also it feels like what you're doing is sculpting, and through that sculpting, exposing the talent of the people on your team, like revealing the talent, allowing them to find that path to express their full creative potential and expand their creative potential. And all the while, you're also tying it to the business. So it's maybe I'm going too far with this sculpting metaphor, but it feels
I
like
like it.
that's what you're doing.
It's a good metaphor, to the point of, I would include the if the statue can sculpt itself a little bit. Like this, it's the sculptor's job to create. But again, it's not me saying to my team member, here's the stuff that's going to make you be successful. Because I don't know everything that's in their head, particularly when they start working for me. I mean, after we've worked together a couple of years, I have a better sense of those things and the things that they want to work on. But at the outset, I've just met this person and I have a sense of what could make them more successful based on what the business needs. But it also has to come from them. And they say, like, well, I want to do this or I want to do that. Like, it would make me more successful to be a better writer or understand the social space better, or, be a better presenter. So it's sort of the combination of those things. And then us together sort of, I'm going back to the sculpting analogy. It's not sculpting the person; it's sculpting that person's future and career path. I think is a nice way to approach that. Like, we are creating that future together.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And so you're just being creative in very different ways now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And yeah, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. You were talking about interviewing people, and during that interviewing process, you're telling about the one-on-ones. And again, proving that I just didn't read the cover of your book. I think it's chapter six. I
Yeah.
think chapter six. You talk about like hiring creative talent.
Yes.
So I'd like you to tell me a little bit about how did you what is your sort of approach to hiring creative talent? I'm sure it depends on the context of, the team, the business, and
Yeah.
team, I think, is critical. Like, how do you build a team? And I'll draw an analogy to coaches and general managers in sports leagues. Um, you've got superstars on the team, but then you also have what they call glue guys, right? Or glue
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who aren't they're not the greatest. Nobody's going to write a book about them. But without them, the whole doesn't work. So, how do you think about hiring individual creative talent? And then, how do you think about designing the team? Because the team is like the manifestation of the environment in a way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questions wrapped up in that one. I think probably at the highest level, the way that I think about hiring a team is looking for people who are good at the things that I'm not good at. And I mean, sorry, and I know you already said like we got to take in. What I should say, like, what do I need from a business standpoint? What am I capable of doing myself, and what are the things that I'm not good at in there? So, for example, like I said before, like my background is as a copywriter, right? I'm good at writing ads. I can knock off like 100 good headlines in an hour. I can write a TV script. I'm good at that. But at LinkedIn, especially, I had a lot of functions reporting to me that were outside of my area of expertise, right? So I had copy folks reporting to me, but I had art directors and designers and producers and strategists and while I know enough about those areas, based on my experience in the business to understand what they do, I'm not an expert at them. And so I really, when I hired that team, I had to have a really frank conversation with myself to say, like, what are my weaknesses here? So that I can hire people who are good at those things, and not only who are good at those things to run those pieces of the business, but also who I can learn from. Like, I'm going to grow as a leader because people are teaching me to do the things that I'm not already good at. So that's like the highest level. Right? And in the book, I use this analogy of like being a CEO of your team, right? I think there's this big myth about CEOs that, they know everything. They should know how to do every job. They should be great at everything. And that's not true. What they're good at is knowing what they're good at and what they're not so good at, and hiring people you know, to do the things that they're not so good at. Now they still need to manage them and guide them and sculpt them, to continue that analogy. Um, but they need to find people who are good at the things they're not, because nobody's good at everything. Um, so yeah, that's where I start, is finding those, knowing what the business needs, and then finding people who are good at the things who I'm not that I am not so good at.
So then, if we go a layer deeper,
Yeah.
and depending on the size of the creative team, how do you make sure? How do you sort of look to? I don't know. I guess design a team to make sure you've got the right, not just skills, but people that are going to mesh well together. Going back to that, that me mindset versus we mindset. Like, how does that we mindset factor into hiring?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's tough, because when somebody's sitting in an interview, you've got like half an hour to get to know them, which is not enough time. The way that I really try to do that is actually um, I treat the interview as kind of like the last in a series of conversations. I work really, really hard to build my pipeline. And so hopefully by the time somebody comes into an interview, I've already been talking to them for a year, in some cases 2 years, just like getting to know them, being really transparent about like what's happening at the company that I'm working at, and feeling like that relationship already exists. And so, hopefully in those series of conversations over the months, and again, I'm not talking to them all the time if they're working somewhere else, but I'm checking in with people who I'm really interested in and saying like, hey, what's going on? Where you're at. Are you thinking about a move? One of the stories I tell in the book is about a guy who he was an art director at the time, and I saw his book, and I just thought his work was really really spot on. This was really smart, and so I reached out to him, and he said, "Cool, I'm really interested in talking. Let's talk in a week." And then like, a few weeks later, he's like, "Oh, sorry, I was on a shoot. Can we talk in a few more weeks?" And so that sort of evolved, like, cut to the chase. Like, I didn't actually get him in until almost a year and a half after I started that initial conversation. But along the way, we'd had enough back and forth, in those emails to say like, "Hey, here's what's going on here. Here's the kind of leader I'm going to be. Here's what you can expect if you come work for me." So by the time we actually got to the official interview, he already knew the things that he needed to know about the place. And so the interview was almost a little bit more of a formality. Again, using the analogy of selling work that we were talking about before, it's not, it's not you get the assignment, you go away and you come back with the dog and pony show. It's the relationship, it's the work, it's the conversations that you have over time, so that when you get to the official presentation, you get to the official interview, it's almost already a done deal because you've got that background.
I think that's really smart. I wonder if you picked up uh, that sort of approach to recruiting at Apple, who are famous for like building this amazing talent pipeline of, just getting to know people well in advance. And the best companies and the best CEOs and executives tend to do this. And you said a creative leader should think of themselves as the CEO of the creative team, and I think that's bang on. And just building a talent pipeline, because you're right, like you can't know a lot in a 30-minute conversation. And I see a lot of creative leaders getting put into corners because they're up against a wall and they're going to hire based on who's going to say yes as quickly as possible versus, oh, I've already got like 20 people in the pipeline that I can call up and go, hey, are you ready to come on board now? We already know each other because you've invested the time in building that rapport and understanding them and them understanding you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, when you're under the gun and you don't have a lot of time, I think the default is just to hire somebody with a great portfolio. And sometimes that works out. And sometimes, you know, great portfolios are made by not quite as great people. And so, back to that culture, back to that building that we mentality, investing in getting to know the people behind the work. And again, that's not to say that that work isn't important, but that to me is like kind of the cost of entry when I am looking through portfolio sites and in award shows and in the trades, and I see a piece of work that I think is really good. That's step one. It's not like, oh, I have to hire that person. It's, oh, that's a person I want to get to know more about, to see if culturally, if from a personality standpoint, they're the kind of person that would fit the team that I'm building. So I know they've got that great work, and I know that they've got that personality piece as well.
Yeah, I love that because great work is certainly like it's what should open the conversation, but it's really that deep understanding of each other and them understanding you and your team as well. Because you're not just hiring somebody; they're also hiring you as the next stage of their career. And I think if we look at it as a mutual thing, then better chances of it's going to be a good fit.
Absolutely. And one of the can I share one of my favorite interview questions along those
Of
lines?
course. Yeah, I'd
So
love to hear it.
one of the things I love asking people, although again, if I'm doing it right, I will hopefully have the answer to this because we've been talking for so long. But when I'm in official interview mode, I say, okay, so you know, let's say you take this job, and 4 years from now, you come to me and say, Kevin, what a great experience it's been working for you. I've learned so much. But whatever the hottest agency is in the world, just called you up and they want you to be their creative lead. They want you to be their CCO. Um, what do you want to have learned in those 4 years between now and then? So just setting up that expectation of like, I don't expect you to work here forever. I'm here for your success. I'm here to listen to to what you want to learn from this place. I think that just I don't know, I think it just sets the right tone for the team, and it helps the person who's coming in be really forward looking in the approach to the job.
Yeah, I think that's just a really healthy way of looking at things, not just when hiring people, just relationships in general, right? Like,
Yeah,
um, I think we should just be honest with each other about like what is the value that we're trying to create together,
yeah,
and what are we trying to create for ourselves individually. And if we're just more open and honest about that, I think that you know all manner of relationships, like professional, personal, otherwise, would just be a lot easier, and I think a
yeah,
lot more joyful is what they
yeah,
would be.
yeah. Back to that, absolutely. And I really try to be transparent both in the interview and in those team meetings that I have every week and in our one to ones about like the bad stuff that's going on. I worked in Silicon Valley for a long time, and there's this term called toxic positivity, where it's the expectation that everything needs to be great all the time. And I just don't believe that's the right approach. I mean, I think it's amazing to celebrate the wins, and I think it's great when things are going great. But I think you got to be really honest with people when things are not going so great, or saying like, "Hey, this could have been better," or here's the scary part of the job. I mean, it's all part of like, when I would interview people for LinkedIn or Apple, I wouldn't say like, "It's awesome, everything's amazing all the time." I'd say, "Hey, here's some good things about this place, and here's some not so good things. I'd love your help in fixing the not so good things, but if the worst thing that I can do bringing you onto this team is to tell you that it's going to be one way, and then you show up and you be like, whoa, you didn't tell me that." Because that's going to set a bad foundation for this relationship. Like, we need to build this relationship on trust for you to be successful here.
Yeah, and trust is so key. I'll share a personal anecdote of what's been
Yeah.
going on in my life the last couple of months. My girlfriend and I adopted a disabled incontinent dog. He got hit by a car in Mexico,
Oh,
so he lost use of both of his back legs. And I'll just say this: like a disabled incontinent dog on Instagram is very different than having him in your house 24
yeah.
hours a day.
Yeah.
But we then sat down and had a conversation 10 days in, because like the house was a disaster. Our schedules were like not ours. And we just sat down and said all the uncomfortable things out loud about what we were each feeling. And then all of a sudden it felt like we just had this renewed energy, and we're like, okay, let's remember who we are and we're going to figure this out. And again, I think that transparency and just speaking truth just accelerates getting to not just trust, but the fortitude. Okay, like nothing's ever perfect. We're going to figure this out and how it's going to work, whether again it's in a personal or professional setting. So I love that approach that you're taking.
Yeah.
It is so healthy versus that toxic positivity.
Yeah, and I love that you and your girlfriend just made space for each other to talk like that. One of the things that I really believe, and again going back to one to one, sometimes people would come to me with a problem, that's something that was like really bothering them, and then they would tell me about it. And my first question before I tried to go in a problem solving mode was just to say like, "Hey, do you want to problem solve, or do you just want space to talk about this?" And no judgments. Like, both of those are totally, totally okay. And sometimes, again, to your point, sometimes you just need space to vent about your incontinent disabled dog. You don't need to problem solve. You don't need to find where to buy the doggy diapers and stuff. Sometimes you just gotta like let it out, and you feel better. Great. So yeah, I'm really glad you, you practice that.
Yeah. And then you just deal with whatever's in front of you.
Yeah,
So
literally and
um,
figuratively.
Yeah, I love how you're think about building talent pipelines, getting to know the people behind the work over time. As a CEO of the creative team internally, how do you then again sort of like, it's not outward facing in terms of outside the company, but outside the creative team and across the organization, how do you get them to see the people behind the work? Because that then creates more like connective tissue and understanding of the creative team and who they are and what they're capable of and what they want to be able to do for the business. Because most in-house teams are always dealing with the tension of like, oh, Are they still going to work with external agencies? If they are, how are we perceived and seen? So, what's any sort of lived experience or advice that you have there for like how to be a confident CEO of an internal creative team and helping the organization see the people, the potential, and the aspirations behind the work, behind the capacity,
Yeah, it's so sorry, do you mean for the whole organization or just for the team?
the whole organization.
Yeah. I think really giving the team the chance to so typically, well, let me back up for a second. So I think typically in an external agency client relationship, the client only sees the people in the presentation. One of the great advantages of working in house again is like we're all on the same team, we're all part of the same company, and so what I look for, and often like presentations, not only is the presentation not a great place for an internal client to get to know an agency, often like the attendance is really restricted. Like you want to keep it small for whatever reason, just because so many people in a room can be counterproductive. And so I really try to look for opportunities at an agency, an agency that junior person might get to go to the presentation and say a line or two. I try not to make it about the presentation. I try to build that relationship building into the culture. And so in the meetings before the presentation, in the one-to-ones that happen with clients, I try to invite those other people along to give them visibility that way. The other thing that I'll do is like try to find opportunities again to get those people in to get those people, if not physically at least in spirit, in front of those clients, and to say like, hey, you're going to see a bunch of work today. The people in the room definitely worked on it, but just so you know, there are all these other people who are working on it, and they didn't have the opportunity to be here today, but I want you to know who they are, what their roles are, that they exist. It's all about that transparency, whether you're being transparent with your team or transparent with your clients about all of the work that goes into the work.
And I think one of the later chapters could have been 8 or 9.
Yeah,
You talk about selling creative work isn't selling
yeah,
out. I think I remember that correctly.
yeah.
So, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by selling creative work? Again, are you talking about like selling using the in-house creative team versus going external?
No, what I really talk about in that chapter again is that sort of this myth of the dog and pony show, right? That the client is going to buy your work because you've brought fireworks and pyrotechnics and songs and dances to the presentation. But that's not the reason, in my experience now, why clients buy work, and particularly in house, why they don't. Like they're buying work because you are showing that you understand their business and the problems that they're trying to solve. And again, that one-to-one model, I think, is so important. Like I use it everywhere. I use it, with my team, with my managers, with individuals on the team, and I use it with clients too. I really try to have regular one-to-ones with the clients so that those problems are being solved along the way and not in the big presentation. Like by the time you get to the presentation, we've talked about those challenges in one-to-ones together. We've framed the assignment up as a goal. How do we brainstorm solutions for this goal together so that when it's time to give that final approval, we've already been having those conversations. So again, it's like that long tail applies to selling work. It applies to hiring talent. It applies to setting people up for success. And I know keep returning to that, but that's really like, my center is like this long-term relationship building through one-to-ones is the foundation for success in the business.
I think it's good you keep coming back to that because it reinforces, like, sure, it might be a business cliche, but it's true. It's like the fundamentals matter. and the
Yeah.
fundamentals are things that you keep doing over and over again. And for you, one of your core fundamentals is those one-on-ones. It's relationship building, and
Yeah.
I firmly believe that relationship, because ultimately everything we do is it's a human experience, and that human experience could be horrible or it could be great. It's more likely to be great if we do these one-to-ones. We have the conversations, not necessarily with, "Let's have a conversation because we have to achieve a certain outcome by the end of it." It's more like these compounding returns of multiple one-on-ones and conversations that over time, as you've spoken about frequently throughout our conversation and ones we've had offline, it's that understanding of each other, so that we could, you know, you need to understand the clients, you need to understand the people on your team, and then you take all these inputs and figure out like, how do we make all these things work together, or how do you have conversations to help people understand how they might need to steer a little bit differently.
And by the way, I think what you said, about the relationship building and like one of the things that I try really hard to do at my one-to-ones is connect with people on a personal level. So yeah, I mean, we have goals to achieve together. We have things that are going to help them be more successful, but I always try to learn something about somebody personally, so it's not all transactional, right? So now I know that you were a dog owner, and next time we speak, like I can talk about my dog who is back home with my in-laws, but I will see in a couple of months and I miss him terribly, and we can just sort of have that common experience. So when I have one-on-ones with clients, with my team members, like I know what's going on in their lives as people, and it's not just like, okay, how can we make you a better presenter, how can we make you a better designer. It's how do we understand each other? How can we empathize with each other so that we can also achieve those business goals ultimately? But just how do we relate to each other on a more human level? Because ultimately, the work that we're doing, right? We are creating emotional responses in our customers and our audiences, and that comes from the emotions that we share in the professional relationship.
I'd like to sort of do a bit of a U-turn and go back to rituals.
Yeah,
You talk quite a bit about like feedback. And feedback is so critical in any line of work, but especially creative work, because a lot of it is subjective. And people pour themselves into creative work. Like, what can you tell me? What can you tell the listeners? Like, what has worked for you in terms of like good ways, even bad ways of like
yeah.
providing feedback? Because I just think it's such a critical component of great creative leadership.
Yeah, well, there's I can talk about this for for hours, so cut me off if I go too long. I think the first thing before any feedback is given, and this goes back to the very first thing that we talked about, is that creating an environment where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to mess up, and that we trust each other is like so key to giving feedback. Because if I'm giving feedback to somebody and they know that I've got their best interests at heart, they know that I'm trying to set them up for success, they know that I'm trying to help them sell the work, that's a very, very different emotional state than they feel like, I'm trying to kill their work because I want to push my idea through. So the first thing is feedback happens. Again, this is back to that long tail thing, right? Feedback happens, the environment for feedback happens way before the meeting. It's setting up that environment of psychological safety where you can give feedback without worrying about hurting somebody's feelings, or them feeling okay getting feedback. So number one is like that's the foundation. But on a much more tactical level, I want to go back to something you said about feedback is so subjective, and I think that's really key in my feedback process. Is I try to be as objective as possible, and the reason for that is like I hire I'm hiring creatives because hopefully they're really, because I like their work and I like them. Like I hired them because they're really, really good at what they do. So who's to say that their subjective opinion is more valid than mine, or my subjective opinion is more valid than theirs? So I try to like leave the subjective part to them because that's what I hired them to do, was to bring taste to it. Again, and I'll get into my own taste in a bit, but I start there. Um, and I really try to give objective feedback. So well, first of all, the first thing that I say is, just like I am trying to set you personally up for success as a member of this team, our collective goal is to set the work up for success. So like, it's not about, do I like green? Do you like blue? Do you think it's funny? I don't think it's funny. It's not about that. It's like, what's going to help this work? What are we defining success as for the work? Is it selling it to the client? Is it winning an award? Is it, whatever that is? Like, let's help this work be more successful. And typically that's like selling the work, right? Because if the work doesn't get sold, it's it's the tree falling in the woods. Um, so I'll say, okay, my job here is to set the work up for success. So I'm going to give you objective feedback that I think will help set the work up for success. So the kinds of things that I give feedback on are, is the work on brief, right? That seems like a very basic thing. So the brief says it's targeted for these people. Do we feel like it's targeted for those people? It says the brief is, it's a television commercial. Is it a television commercial? Did you bring me a radio thing instead? Um, what context does this work live in, right? It's not just the ad that's on your desk. I'll tell you a story from Apple that I like to tell a lot about context. And this was, so one of the things when I worked in an agency was all about like the script that was on my desk, and I didn't think about necessarily, aside from the fact it was on TV, it was on a billboard, it was in a print ad, like beyond that. But so at Apple, I worked on the retail team for a long time. And one of the things we had to do was signs, like not necessarily very glamorous, but really educational, at least for me. So, for example, uh, when the company would launch a new iPhone, people used to like line up around the corner for Apple stores. I don't know if they do that anymore. They probably can just like order it online. Anyway, we'd need to make a sign, and it would say, if you bought your iPhone online, line up here. Cool, easy, done. Right? Except in the UK, when it launched, you can't say line up here. You have to say queue up here. So you need to make another version of the sign. And then when you do it in Dutch or German, it gets really, really, really long. So you have to write a shorter version of it. And when you do it in simplified Chinese, it's only 2 or 3 characters. So you have to redo the design. So anyway, my point is like, I like to give feedback around not just the thing that I'm looking at on the wall, but like, where is it going to live, and does it make sense where it's living? I give feedback around the brand, and so for LinkedIn or for Apple, what are the things that the brand holds to be true, and does this work feel like it's in line with the brand? If you work at an agency, like agencies have a very specific point of view, and I think giving feedback around like, is this in line with your agency's brand? Like, are you a disruptor, or do you do comedy? Are you mischievous? Like, what's your agency's brand? So there are all of these objective things. And by the way, just stop me if I'm rambling, but like I said, I
No,
love
no,
talking
this
about
is fascinating. Keep going.
there are all of these objective things that you can go through to give feedback on the work that the team doesn't ever have to feel personally put upon, because it's not, I like red, you like blue. It's, here are the things that is going to set the work up for success. And this can sometimes happen in one meeting, and sometimes this happens over the course of months, depending on how long you have to do the project. But at some point, all of the objective stuff gets really, really tight. It's all buttoned down, it's bulletproof. And then I say, okay, I thank the team profusely, and I say, thank you for making this work so bulletproof. You have given me the luxury, you've given me the gift of being able to give you my subjective feedback now. So only after we've done all of that due diligence do I say, okay, you know, I think this should be funnier, or I think it should be greener, or I think it should be bluer. But having said that, most of the time, I don't even give any subjective feedback at that point because I feel like, again, I try to let the team make the creative calls. I'm trying to help the work be more successful through my objective feedback. And we wind up at a piece of work that is set up for success because it's bulletproof, because it's emotional, because a client will buy it, because it hits all of their, all of their hot buttons.
I think that's really smart because if you start with the objective feedback, then I would imagine a creative who you've hired and know has the talent and the capability to for great creative work, then through that process of receiving and reacting to that objective feedback, they're it's not like they turn off their own subjective mind of how should this show up? Should it be green or blue? Should it, should it be should it be animated or static or whatever other
Yeah.
creative decisions they're making? They're also thinking through that while receiving and reacting to that objective feedback. So when it finally gets to you and that like stage where you go, okay, now I can give subjective feedback, like you said, it's probably not needed at that point. And your job
No.
really, as you said right from the start, as a creative leader, your job isn't the work anymore. You have veto power, sure. So if somebody does something that really shouldn't go out the door, and it's in that subjective realm, you could veto it. But your job was to hire the right people. Your
Exactly.
job is to make sure the objective needs are met. And then if you see people making those decisions that require heavy subjective intervention, that's probably then a good signal as well, like there's a disconnect there as well.
Yeah, and that's a different conversation. And again, that's a thing that I would address in one to one. And I would say, like, hey, to help you be more successful individual, not like in a meeting knocking them down in front of the team, but in a one to one, I would say, hey, this is a thing that I noticed or have been noticing about the work that you do. I think you would be more successful if you approached it more this way creatively. What do you think about that? I also think, I want to go back to one of the things that you said, which I think is really interesting and really true, is like through that feedback loop, my teams start to understand how I think about work, right? I love to say like it's nobody can read your mind. Like it is crazy for me to expect a team to do exactly what I would do. That's nuts. But it's not crazy for them to understand how I think. And so as a leader, when I give feedback, I try to talk through everything that's in my head. And I'm saying like, okay, here's why I'm giving this objective feedback. Here is in great detail how I'm thinking about it and why, so that when you approach your next project, you'll hear my voice in your head. And again, you're not necessarily going to agree with me. You're not necessarily going to do exactly the same thing that I would do, but at least you understand how I think about it and why I'm saying these things because I think they're important to the business and to the success of the work.
Yeah, and it's got so many other returns, like you just said it, why it's important to the business. So that objective feedback process is really about like what are we trying to achieve for the business? And through that, the people on the creative team get closer and closer to really rooting themselves in. This is about business, like what the business needs. This is about business impact. And then when they're at the table for a net new project with like internal business stakeholder talking about some new initiative, they're coming in with that same mindset. So it creates better alignment with stakeholders in the business. And they're probably thought of as like, hey, we should pull that creative team in like right from the get-go just to sort of like think through the possibilities even before we
Yeah,
get to the tactical of like, do we want a landing page or an email marketing campaign? It's like,
yeah.
let's just
Yeah,
bring them in as thinking partners.
yeah, exactly. And by the way, I know it feels like now that I'm playing back what we just said in my heads about like in our heads about sorry, playing back in my head about all this objectivity. I don't want to create the impression that like I'm some kind of automaton, that it is like it's not like an if it's not like an if then thing. I mean, I still there is room for subjectivity and there's absolutely room for emotion. Like one of the things that I truly believe is like you got to lead with your heart. And so if your first reaction to a piece of work isn't like, oh my God, that made me feel something, I'm laughing or I'm crying or I'm motivated to action or I'm angry, whatever that thing is, like that's still got to be there. Um, I just bring in the subjective filters. Like, again, I'm trusting the team to bring me something that's going to make me feel something. And from there is when I bring in those objective filters. So it's not like, it's not this metallic, robotic, hard process. It's process built around a soft, creamy, delicious core of emotion.
Yeah, what's that old saying? Like, I don't know, like, there's something about Iron Fist, Velvet Glove in there, or maybe it's, like, reversed or something like that, but
Yeah,
you need both, and they feed off
yeah,
each other.
yeah,
So here's where I'd love to end in our last couple of minutes is you also, and maybe this is sort of um, a different type of feedback. You talk about gratitude, um, in the book.
yeah.
Why do you talk about gratitude so much, and why do you think that is? Why do you think that's important? I love it. I write an annual birthday message with. I turned 53 a couple of months ago, so a bunch of people received the 53 things I'm grateful for from the
Yeah.
past year. And it could have been a list that was 10 or 100 times longer. But why do you write so much about gratitude? And why do you think that's important for a creative leader to embody?
I think, I mean, everybody likes being thanked. Everybody likes to feel recognized. But I think for creative people in particular, they're starved for it. I think, they're on they go through 20 rounds of creative updates, and they bring it into a client, and the client like immediately dives into what's wrong with it, you know, and that's fine. I mean, I think part of the process is is to give feedback and to change things, and we all get that. But just a little bit of thank you goes a long way, and not just like thank you in general, but thank you specifically for going 20 rounds, or for keeping your cool in a meeting that got kind of charged, or for supporting a teammate when they were feeling down. Like, creative people just need to hear thank you. They're so emotionally invested in their work. They Yeah, it's I'm trying to rationalize a thing that can't really be rationalized, right? Thank you is just like, it goes a long way, and creative people are hungry for it. And it's interesting. I reconnected with a guy who I worked with in Chicago many years ago, who now runs his own agency, and he read the first chapter of my book and immediately like pinged me and said, "I just read the first chapter of your book, and I'm so glad you started with thank you, because somewhere along the way somebody told me that thank you is a sign of weakness." And I was like, I don't know, it seemed so counterintuitive to me after all that I've learned. I can't imagine somebody thinking that saying thank you, that showing gratitude, is a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. So I think, yeah, I mean, if there's nothing else you remember as a creative leader, as any kind of leader, it's just to say thank you, just to be grateful. I think, in creativity too, like, we have these we have kind of silly jobs sometimes. And again, I know we've talked about, like, again, the reason I worked at Apple was because I believed in the product, and I really think that the technology is making the world a better place. Same thing at LinkedIn. One of the things I got so much satisfaction out of at that job was helping people get jobs, learn skills, those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, like, I've worked on cereal commercials, and I'll tell you a story about a cereal commercial I worked on, right? I was working on some kind of flakes, and we were going to shoot the part of the spot where you toss the flakes through the milk, like the the big money shot at the end. And the food stylist comes to me and my partner, and he's got a tray full of like all of these flakes. So they're like brown flakes. They're like bran flakes, and they all look the same. And he said, "Which one do you want to choose for the milk shot?" And I kind of looked at him. I said, "Well, what's the difference?" And seriously, he's like, "Oh, well, this one's playful, and this one's a little bit of a rapscallion, and this one's a little, angry, and this one's really happy." So I guess my point is, it's like, we work in a silly business, so like, be grateful that we get to sit around and think up really interesting, creative things all day long. So I think there's just yeah, there's so much to be grateful for in what we do, and expressing that as a leader is important and it's powerful.
I love that, and I love the. It's just not about saying thank you. It's thank you with specificity
Yeah.
is the killer gratitude algorithm. 100% believe in that. And on that note, Kevin, thank you for taking the time to do this. You spent a couple of conversations with me offline. We got to know each other. I learned about your book. We shared, a lot of thoughts and perspectives on the current landscape, and you were kind enough to, share your book with me and with the world at large now. So really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to getting this episode out to the audience. And I hope those that are listening after listening to this that if you already haven't, go and grab a copy of Kevin's book. Whether you're a current creative leader or somebody in a creative role and looking to get there, or if you're a CMO who's listening, buy a copy or buy 10 for your creative team. I think they would be better off for it.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for that gracious plug of my work. And yeah, I'm looking forward to keeping the conversation going.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.